Millionaire returns from a long trip and sees a new black maid in his house, but subscribe and tell us where you're watching us from. The sound of Grace Mitchell's high heels made a clicking noise as she walked through the big, shiny halls of the Pierce mansion. She carefully placed pretty flowers into a giant glass vase near the entrance. Her fingers gently moved each flower, making sure they looked perfect. Grace had been the housekeeper for 6 months, and she knew every little thing about the house. Sometimes she felt like the house whispered secrets only she could hear. Through the big windows, Grace saw a black car driving through the gates. Her heart started beating fast. Jonathan Pierce was finally coming back from his long trip to Asia. She had been waiting for this moment, making sure everything was perfect. The house was super clean and everything was just right. Jonathan stepped out of the car. His fancy suit was wrinkled because of the long flight. He was 45 years old, and even though he looked tired, he still seemed very important, like a powerful boss. His blue eyes showed that he hadn't slept much, and there were some gray hairs in his brown hair. When he opened the front door, a familiar smell greeted him. Lavender, his late wife Victoria's favorite scent. It hit him like a strong wave of memories, making him stop for a moment. The house looked neater than ever before. Not even Margaret, the old housekeeper, had made it this perfect. Everything was placed exactly the way Victoria used to keep it. "Welcome back, Mr. Pierce," a soft voice said. Jonathan turned quickly, surprised. His eyes widened. The woman standing in front of him looked exactly like Victoria. She had the same green eyes, the same delicate face, and even the same way of tilting her head when she smiled. "You must be," Jonathan started to say, his voice shaking. "I'm Grace Mitchell, your new housekeeper," she said. "Margaret showed me everything before she left." Jonathan felt his legs wobble. He had to lean on the wall. How was this possible? "Are you all right, Mr. Pierce? Should I get you some water?" Grace asked, looking worried. "No, Jonathan took a deep breath. "I'm just tired from the trip. The house looks different," he said, looking around. "I hope you like the changes." Grace said, "I found some ideas in a notebook in your office." Jonathan's heart stopped. Victoria's notebook. She had written all her ideas for the house in a small blue book. No one else knew about it. "What notebook?" he asked. Grace hesitated for a moment. "A blue notebook I found while organizing the office. It had instructions for decorations, flower arrangements, even how to fold the napkins." A shiver ran down Jonathan's spine. It was impossible for Grace to know about these things. Victoria had died 2 years ago. No one but her knew these little details. "I've prepared your room just the way you like it," Grace continued. "Egyptian cotton sheets, soft feather pillows, and a bottle of Voss water next to the bed." Jonathan felt a chill. Those were exactly Victoria's choices for their bedroom. Even Margaret, the old housekeeper, didn't know these things. "How do you know?" Jonathan started to ask, but his phone rang. It was his assistant, reminding him about a video meeting in 30 minutes. "You must be tired. I'll make you coffee," Grace said. "Just the way you like it, strong, no sugar, with a little cinnamon." Jonathan watched as she walked away, his whole body tense. The way she moved, the way she spoke, the way she knew everything. It was disturbing. It felt like Victoria had come back, but as a different person. As Jonathan walked upstairs to his office, he couldn't stop thinking. Who was Grace Mitchell? How did she know so much about Victoria, and why did she look exactly like her? That night, Jonathan couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about Grace, the way she spoke, the way she acted, the things she knew. It was all too strange. The next morning, he canceled his meetings. He had to find answers. While looking through his office, he heard a soft voice behind him. "Looking for something, Mr. Pierce?" Jonathan turned. It was Grace, holding a tray with breakfast. "Actually, yes," Jonathan said, standing up. "You mentioned a blue notebook yesterday. Can you show me where you found it?" Grace placed the tray on the table and walked to the old wooden bookcase. She reached into the third shelf and pulled out the small notebook. She handed it to Jonathan. "It's all here," she said. "The notes are very detailed." Jonathan flipped through the pages. It was Victoria's handwriting. His hands shook as he read about the way she liked the house, room temperatures, flower arrangements, even the order of books on the shelves. "How did you get this?" he asked. "Margaret gave it to me," Grace said. "She found it while cleaning." Jonathan frowned. Margaret had never mentioned this notebook before. "I called Margaret last night," he lied. "She doesn't remember giving you any notebook." Grace paused. Her hands were still on the curtains. "Maybe she forgot," she said. It was a quick transition. Jonathan stepped closer. "Who are you really, Grace? How do you know all these things?" Grace turned to him, her green eyes calm. "I'm just your housekeeper, Mr. Pierce. Any resemblance to your wife is just a coincidence." Before Jonathan could say more, his phone rang again. It was another business call. He sighed. "I need to take this call, but our conversation isn't over." Grace nodded and left the room, leaving behind the soft scent of lavender. Jonathan spent the rest of the day investigating. He searched online, called agencies, and even hired a private investigator. Everything about Grace's past seemed normal. Her records showed she had worked in other big houses before, but none of her old bosses were available to confirm. Later that day, Jonathan walked into Grace's bedroom. It was clean and simple, but on the dresser something caught his eye. A small music box. His heart pounded. It was exactly like the one he had given Victoria for their first anniversary. Jonathan carefully opened the box. A familiar tune played, Moon River, Victoria's favorite song. Inside the box, he found an old photo. His hands shook as he looked at it. It was a picture of two little girls about 10 years old. They looked exactly the same, twins. Before he could study it more, he heard footsteps. He quickly put the box back and left the room. His mind was racing. Could Victoria have had a twin sister? Why had she never told him? That night, Jonathan did more research. He knew Victoria had grown up in an orphanage in Portland. But when he searched for records, he found out that a fire had destroyed many of them. It was like her past had been erased. The next morning at breakfast, Jonathan noticed something else strange. Grace served toast with blackberry jam, the exact kind Victoria used to buy from a small farm in Oregon. "Where did you get this jam?" he asked, trying to stay calm. "I found the recipe in a notebook in the kitchen," Grace said. "I thought it was interesting and decided to make it. I hope it tastes like the original." Jonathan knew he was being lied to. Victoria had never written down the recipe. She had bought it directly from a farm, and that farm had closed down over a year ago when the old owners passed away. That afternoon, a private investigator named Frank Harrison came to Jonathan's office with his first findings. "Mr. Pierce, I found something interesting," Frank said, placing a folder on the desk. "These are records from the orphanage in Portland where your wife grew up. 2 children were abandoned there on the same night in 1985. They were twins." Jonathan felt his heart start to race. "Go on." "One of the girls, Victoria, was adopted 3 months later by a family in Seattle," Frank continued. "The other twin—" He hesitated before speaking again. "She mysteriously disappeared from the orphanage 6 months later. There's no record of her after that." Jonathan was confused. "And Grace Mitchell?" Frank sighed. "That's where things get strange. Grace Mitchell has only existed for the last 5 years, but before that, there are no records of her. No school records, no birth certificate, nothing." Jonathan leaned back in his chair, trying to process this. Could Grace really be Victoria's lost twin sister? It seemed more and more possible. But something still didn't make sense. Why had she come now? And why was she working as Victoria's housekeeper? A noise in the hallway interrupted Jonathan's thoughts. Grace walked past, carrying an old box. Jonathan recognized it immediately. It held Victoria's photo albums. "Excuse me, Mr. Pierce," Grace said when she saw him. "I found these while cleaning the attic. I thought they deserved a better place." Leave them here, Jonathan ordered, his voice sharper than he meant. Grace placed the box on a side table and left. As soon as she was gone, Jonathan opened the albums. In the middle of the neatly arranged pictures, he found a loose photograph. When he picked it up, he froze. It was the same picture he had seen in Grace's room, two identical little girls. But this time there was something written on the back. Victoria and Kate, Portland, 1985. Jonathan whispered, "Kate." "Frank," he said quickly, "look up that name. Kate must be the twin sister." As Frank took notes, Jonathan's phone buzzed. It was an urgent message from Grant about a problem at the Chicago branch. With a sigh, Jonathan realized he had to put the investigation on hold and handle the business crisis. That evening, when Jonathan returned home, he found Grace in the garden, tending to the white roses, Victoria's favorite. The setting sun made her look even more like Victoria. Jonathan took a deep breath and called out, "Kate." Grace froze. Her hands stayed on the roses. After a moment, she turned to face him. Her green eyes were shining with unshed tears. "How long have you known?" she asked in a trembling voice. "I just found out," Jonathan said, stepping closer. "Why didn't you tell me?" Kate let out a quiet sob. "After all these years, after losing Victoria, when I heard she died, I was heartbroken. I needed to understand the life my sister had, to meet the man she loved." Jonathan felt so many emotions at once: anger at her lie, sadness for her pain, confusion about what to do next. "What happened after you two were separated?" he asked. Kate sat on a garden bench, her hands shaking. "I ran away to find Victoria, but I got lost. I ended up in foster homes, moving from city to city, always changing names, just trying to survive. When I finally had enough resources to search for her, I found out she was gone." The night grew darker, the garden lights softly glowing around them. Jonathan looked at her face, so much like Victoria's, yet shaped by a completely different life. "Why didn't you just tell me who you were?" he asked. "I was scared," Kate admitted. "Scared of how you would react, scared of ruining Victoria's memory. So I got to know you first through her stories. Her notebook helped me understand her life." Jonathan sat beside her, feeling the weight of the moment. Kate's presence was both comforting and painful. She was a living link to Victoria, but also a reminder of her loss. "What happens now?" he wondered out loud. Kate looked at the white roses. "I don't know, but I want to learn about my sister through her memories, if you'll let me. Not to replace her, just to understand her." The next morning, Jonathan watched Kate in the kitchen. Every movement reminded him of Victoria. But now he saw her differently, not just as a mystery, but as someone who had been searching for family, just like Victoria had. "Grant called 3 times this morning," Kate said, not turning around. "It sounds urgent." Jonathan hesitated before sitting at the kitchen island. "We need to talk more about last night." Kate nodded and placed a cup of coffee in front of him. "Where do you want to start?" "The beginning. What really happened at the orphanage?" Kate took a deep breath. "Victoria and I were inseparable. When she was adopted, I was heartbroken. I wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. Then one stormy night, I ran away. I was only 10 years old. I thought I could find her, but I got lost. A social worker found me 3 days later and put me in a foster home." Jonathan noticed her hands shaking as she poured more coffee. "Why didn't you try to find her later?" "I did, but I was moved from city to city, Sacramento, Denver, Detroit. Every time I tried to settle, I had to start over. When I finally had a chance to search properly, I found out about the accident." Jonathan's phone rang again. Grant, for the 4th time. He silenced it. "And the notebook? How did you find it?" Kate looked down. "I already knew about it. When we were kids, Victoria told me she would keep her most important secrets in a blue notebook. When I saw the news of her death, I knew I had to find it." Jonathan processed this. "So, you didn't just find it by chance?" "No," she admitted. "I researched you, the house, everything. I took the job to get to the notebook. But then..." "Then what?" he asked. "Then I got to know you through her words," Kate said softly. She wrote about how much she loved you. I started to see why." Before Jonathan could say anything, Grant burst into the kitchen. "Mr. Pierce, I tried to call. There's been a leak of confidential information in Chicago. The press is speculating about irregularities." Jonathan cursed. "Get the jet ready. I need to be there in 3 hours." As Grant ran off, Jonathan turned to Kate. "We need to continue this when I get back." "I'll be here," she promised. As he left for the airport, Jonathan realized his life had changed in just a week. Kate was a part of Victoria's past, but she had her own story. Now he had to decide, keep her in his life as a link to Victoria, or set boundaries to protect his memories. As the plane took off, Jonathan knew that this was just the beginning of a much bigger decision. Mr. Pierce told Richard Morton, the head lawyer, to start the internal check on the company. Jonathan had ordered this before, but had gotten distracted. Now he focused on the problem at hand and told them to prepare a statement for the press. It was after 9 at night when Jonathan finally reached the Four Seasons Hotel in Chicago, where he always stayed. In his room, he made a video call to Kate, something he never thought he would do a week ago. "The letters," he said, as soon as she answered. "Have you read them?" Kate hesitated. Her green eyes, so much like Victoria's, looked shiny with tears. "A few. Most are from when she was in college. She never stopped looking for me." Jonathan felt like someone had punched him. Victoria had always been secretive about her past at the orphanage, and now he understood why. "There's a special letter," Kate continued in a shaky voice. "It's from 3 months before the accident. She hired a private investigator to find me." Jonathan sat down heavily in the chair in his room. "Why didn't she tell me?" "The letter says she wanted to be sure before saying anything. She didn't want to get your hopes up." Kate paused. "Jonathan, she was very close to meeting me." Silence filled the air. Jonathan could hear his own heart beating. Victoria had died with this secret. She had wanted to find her sister but never got the chance. "There's one more thing," Kate said softly. "I found documents about a bank account. Victoria was saving money for me." Jonathan closed his eyes. Victoria always kept a separate bank account. He had thought it was for charity, but now he knew the truth. "I have to go back to Chicago next week for a hearing," he said after a moment. "When I return, I want to see all the letters." "Jonathan," Kate said before he could end the call, "there's something I need to tell you in person, something I found with the last letters." Jonathan noticed the worry in her voice. "What is it?" "Not over the phone. It's too important." Kate hesitated. "It's about the accident." Jonathan felt a shiver down his spine. The accident that took Victoria's life had always seemed simple. A rainy night, a sharp turn on the Pacific Coast Highway. But Kate's tone suggested something more. "Wait for my return," he finally said. "And Kate, thank you for telling me about the letters." After ending the call, Jonathan lay awake for hours. He thought about Victoria's last months. Had she tried to tell him? Were there signs he had missed? The next morning, as rain drizzled over Chicago, Jonathan prepared for a press meeting. But his mind was stuck between work and the mystery in his own home. What had Kate found out? Why had Victoria kept so many secrets? The press conference ended, and Jonathan sat alone in the meeting room. He stared at a photo of Victoria's accident on his tablet. Her silver Mercedes had crashed against the highway railing. The image always haunted him, but now, after Kate's words, it seemed more suspicious. "Mr. Pierce?" Grant, his assistant, entered the room with a brown folder. "I found something that might interest you. Victoria's phone records from the day of the accident." Jonathan looked up, suddenly alert. "Why are you showing me this now?" "After you mentioned the letters, I checked some old files," Grant said. "There's a number Victoria called several times in the weeks before the accident. The last call was 30 minutes before she—" "Before what?" Jonathan stood up quickly. "Before she lost control of the car." Jonathan grabbed the folder, The records showed that Victoria had called the same number many times, each call lasting only a few minutes. The last call was at 10:47 p.m. and lasted 12 minutes. "Find out who owns that number," Jonathan ordered, "and cancel my appointments. I need to get back to Los Angeles." On the flight back, Jonathan couldn't stop thinking. Victoria had died at 11:15 p.m. What had happened during that last call? Why was she driving alone so late at night? His phone buzzed with a message from Kate. "We need to talk as soon as you arrive. It's about the private investigator Victoria hired." Jonathan's stomach twisted. Every new piece of the puzzle made things more confusing. The plane shook from turbulence, but the real storm was in his mind. When he landed in Los Angeles, Kate was waiting. She wore a navy blue blazer and black pants, looking more like a businesswoman than a housekeeper. She still looked like Victoria, but Jonathan was starting to notice differences. Kate seemed more serious, more guarded. "The investigator," Kate said as soon as they got in the car. "His name was Robert Kincaid. Victoria hired him 3 months before the accident to find me." "And did he?" Jonathan asked, watching her closely. "Yes." Kate pulled out an old envelope. "I found his final report hidden in a book. He tracked me down in Seattle, where I was working as a financial consultant under the name Grace Mitchell." Jonathan frowned. "So you knew about Victoria before coming to work for me?" "No." Kate shook her head. "I moved before she could contact me. I only found out about the report yesterday." Traffic in Los Angeles was slow as they processed this information. The sunlight created long shadows over the buildings, making the mystery seem even darker. "There's more," Kate continued. "Kincaid died in a car accident 2 weeks after giving Victoria the final report, on the same road, the same stretch of highway." Jonathan shivered. "A coincidence?" "Maybe," Kate said. "But Victoria wrote notes saying someone didn't want us to meet. She mentioned being followed, being threatened." "Who would care that much about keeping you apart?" Jonathan asked. "I don't know." Kate looked at him with serious eyes. "But Victoria found out something. Something big." Jonathan's phone rang. It was Grant. "Mr. Pierce, we traced the number," Grant said. "It belonged to Robert Kincaid." Jonathan hung up, his mind racing. Victoria had spoken to Kincaid minutes before she died, and Kincaid had died weeks later on the same road. "I need to see all the letters and documents," Jonathan told Kate as they reached the mansion. "Every note, every detail." Inside, Kate had carefully organized the letters and documents on a desk. "Victoria started writing these letters when she was 16, Kate explained, holding up some yellowed envelopes. "She never stopped looking for me." As they read the letters, the sun set, casting an orange glow into the room. Jonathan picked up one of the last letters, dated a week before the accident. Victoria's normally neat handwriting was rushed and shaky. "Kate, I finally discovered the truth. Everything makes sense now. Why we were separated, why they wanted to keep us apart. I need to find you before it's too late. There are powerful people involved, and they will do anything to keep this secret hidden." The letter ended suddenly, as if she had been interrupted while writing it. Kate went pale. "Jonathan, her accident wasn't an accident, was it?" The mansion turned into a place of investigation that night. They spent hours looking through documents, trying to understand what Victoria had found out. "We need to talk to someone who knew Victoria back then," Jonathan said. "Someone who might know what she discovered before she died." Kate flipped through the letters. She often mentioned Dr. Patricia Lawson. She was her therapist. Jonathan's heart raced. "Do you think she's the connection?" "It's possible," Kate said. "She worked at the orphanage where Victoria and I were separated." Jonathan searched online. Dr. Henry Lawson still had an office in Santa Monica. "I'm going alone," Jonathan decided. "If someone really killed Victoria, we have to be careful. Your face looks too much like hers. It could be dangerous." Kate didn't want to agree at first, but finally she said yes. "Be careful and take this," she said, handing Jonathan a small recorder. We need to record everything she says. Dr. Henry Lawson's office was in a big, fancy building that had a view of the ocean. The secretary took Jonathan to a waiting room. The room was painted in soft blue and beige colors, making it feel calm and peaceful. "Mr. James Anderson," a voice called. Dr. Henry Lawson stood at the door. She was an older woman, about 60 years old, with neat gray hair and sharp eyes behind thin glasses. Jonathan walked into the office, his heart beating fast. He had hidden the tape recorder inside his jacket. The office was big, with huge windows showing the wide ocean. "How can I help you today?" the doctor asked as she sat in her leather chair. Jonathan looked at her for a moment before speaking. "Actually, Dr. Henry Lawson, I came to ask you about Victoria Pierce." For a split second, her friendly smile disappeared. "I'm sorry, but I can't talk about other patients." Even patients who died in a strange way after finding out secrets about their past? Jonathan leaned forward. Dr. Henry Lawson held on to the armrests of her chair a little tighter. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Anderson. Or should I say Mr. Pierce?" Jonathan nodded. "Yes, you do. Victoria found out something before she died. It was about being separated from her twin sister. It scared her so much that she wrote about it. She said powerful people wanted to keep secrets hidden." The room became silent, except for the soft sound of waves outside. Dr. Henry Lawson got up and walked to the window, standing very still. "Some things should stay secret, Mr. Pierce," she said in a low voice. "Victoria learned that the hard way." "What did she find out?" Jonathan asked. Dr. Henry Lawson turned around. Her eyes looked tired. "She found out that the separation wasn't an accident. It was part of a deal, a very big deal that involved important people." "What kind of deal?" "The kind that made a lot of money. Some rich families couldn't have children, so they paid money to take children from the orphanage. Twins were special. One twin would go to a legal family, but the other, well, they had different plans for them." Jonathan felt sick. "And Victoria figured this out?" Dr. Henry Lawson nodded. "She found old papers from the orphanage," Schatz said. "She came to me because she knew I had worked there before. I told her to stop looking, but she wouldn't listen. She wanted to find her twin sister and tell the world the truth. And then she died in an accident," Jonathan said bitterly, "just like the private investigator she hired." Dr. Henry Lawson sighed. "Mr. Pierce, these people, the families, the doctors, the people in charge, they have everything to lose if the truth comes out," Jonathan whispered. "And now Kate is back." "Is the one of her?" Dr. Raw, Henry Lawson's eyes widened. "Kate is alive? Is she in Los Angeles?" Before Jonathan could answer, there was a loud sound of breaking glass. A small hole appeared in the window, and Dr. Henry Lawson staggered. Blood spread across her back. Jonathan moved quickly. He dropped to the floor and pulled Dr. Henry Lawson down with him. More bullets came through the window, hitting the wall and the desk. "Drawer, red file, everything's there," Dr. Henry Lawson whispered weakly. Outside, sirens wailed as police cars arrived. Jonathan knew he had stepped into something bigger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Victoria's death wasn't just about twins being separated. It was about a huge secret that powerful people would do anything to protect. And now he and Kate were in danger. The police arrived, filling the place with flashing red and blue lights. Jonathan pressed his jacket against Dr. Henry Lawson's wound as paramedics rushed in. "Mr. Pierce?" A detective walked up to him. "I'm Detective Marcus Rodriguez. We need your statement." Jonathan watched as Dr. Henry Lawson was carried away on a stretcher. "Can I do that later? I have something urgent to do." "Sir, this was an attempted murder." "And I'm the only witness," Jonathan interrupted. "I'll be at the police station in 2 hours. I promise." Before the detective could say anything else, Jonathan slipped out the back door. Reporters were already swarming outside. He called Kate. "We need to leave the mansion now. Pack only what you need and meet me at the Four Seasons in Beverly Hills. Use the service entrance and register as Ann Cooper." "Jonathan, what happened? Are you okay?" "I'll explain everything when I see you. Be careful. were being watched. As he drove, Jonathan couldn't stop thinking about what Dr. Henry Lawson had told him. A baby trafficking scheme involving rich families explained why someone wanted to kill to keep it a secret. But why were Victoria and Kate so important? At the hotel, Jonathan waited in the lobby, wearing a cap and sunglasses. Kate arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a small suitcase. "I brought all the papers we could find," she whispered as they took the elevator up, "including Victoria's last letters." In the room, Jonathan locked the door and closed the curtains before opening the red file. Kate sat beside him as he spread out the documents. "Oh my God," she gasped. "These are records from the orphanage. Dozens of twins were separated between 1980 and 1995. Jonathan found a list of names and payments. "It looks like money transfers, millions of dollars per child." Kate picked up an old photo. "Is this Dr. Henry Lawson?" It was a younger Dr. Henry Lawson standing next to a man in front of the orphanage. The caption read, "William Whitman." Jonathan's stomach dropped. William Whitman was one of the biggest donors to the orphanage, and he was also Victoria's adoptive father. Kate turned pale. "Do you think Victoria was chosen on purpose? That I was sold to another family?" Jonathan nodded. "It looks like it. But why did Victoria start investigating after so many years?" Jonathan read a letter from Victoria. "I found out something about Dad today. Something terrible. I need to find Kate before it's too late. If anything happens to me, check the Whitman Foundation archives." The Whitman Foundation, Jonathan realized. William Whitman used it to hide money from the adoption scheme, and Victoria found out. Kate's face hardened. That's why they killed her. She was about to expose them. Suddenly, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Jonathan signaled Kate to hide in the bathroom. He stood near the door, heart pounding. The footsteps stopped right outside. A shadow appeared under the door. Jonathan held his breath. Then his phone rang. It was Grant, the police chief. Dr. Henry Lawson didn't survive the surgery. Jonathan closed his eyes. Another person dead because of this secret. The shadow outside the door was gone, but Jonathan knew it was only a matter of time before they were found. "Grant, I need you to do something," he said quietly. "Check the Whitman Foundation archives. Look for anything on the orphanage between 1980 and 1995. Kate stepped out of the bathroom. Her green eyes, so much like Victoria's, shone with determination. "We have to expose them," she said. "For Victoria. For all the other children." Jonathan nodded. They had just started a war against the most powerful people in Los Angeles. The night was falling, and somewhere in the city, their enemies were already planning their next move. Jonathan's phone beeped. Grant had sent digital files from the Whitman Foundation. They showed years of secrets, corruption, and stolen children. "We need to move," Kate said, packing up their documents. "It's not safe here." Jonathan picked up one file. "Look at this. William Whitman sent money to a company called New Horizons Adoption Services between 1985 and 1990. Kate leaned over. "That name, it sounds familiar." Jonathan's heart pounded. "This is bigger than we thought." "The dates match exactly with the time we were in the orphanage," Kate said, looking at the files. "And there's more," Jonathan added, sliding to the next file. New Horizons was suddenly shut down in 1995 after a federal investigation, but all the records disappeared before the investigators could check them. "How convenient," Kate muttered angrily. "How can we prove anything if all the evidence is gone?" "Not all of it," Jonathan said. He picked up his phone. "Grant, I need you to check all the Whitman Foundation's bank records from the last 30 years. Look for similar payments to different adoption agencies." While Grant worked, Jonathan and Kate quietly left the hotel through the back door. A black Mercedes, rented under a different name, was waiting in the parking lot. "Where are we going?" Kate asked as they left Beverly Hills. "I have a beach house in Malibu that very few people know about," Jonathan said, checking the mirror for any followers. Victoria and I bought it as a secret hideout. Even the Whitmans didn't know about it. The mention of Victoria made the car fall silent. Kate looked out of the window at the Pacific Coast Highway, the same road where her sister had died. "Jonathan," she said softly, "do you think William knew about Victoria's accident?" The question hung in the air. Jonathan gripped the steering wheel tightly, remembering how devastated William had seemed after his daughter's death. But now, everything had to be questioned. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I'm going to find out." Jonathan's phone rang. It was Grant. "Boss, I found something. The Whitman Foundation has been making regular payments to 5 different adoption agencies for 20 years. All of them were shut down under strange circumstances. Send me everything," Jonathan ordered. "And be careful. You might be watched." Soon the beach house came into view. It was a modern home, hidden behind trees and plants. Jonathan opened the gate and parked the car. "Victoria loved this place," he said as he led Kate inside. She said it was the only place where she could be herself, away from her family's expectations. Kate ran her fingers over the glass window, looking at the ocean. "She mentioned this house in her letters," she said. "She called it her safe haven." While Kate explored, Jonathan spread out the documents on the dining table, making a timeline of events. A disturbing pattern appeared. Since the 1980s, the Whitman Foundation had been secretly moving millions of dollars through adoption agencies that handled twin separation cases. "Jonathan," Kate called from the living room, "I found something." She held an old book from the shelf. Inside, several old photos had fallen out. One showed William Whitman at a meeting with serious-looking men. "Turn it over," Jonathan suggested. On the back, in Victoria's handwriting, was written, "Annual Board Meeting, Whitman Foundation, 1985. Dad and the other benefactors planning more special adoptions." "She knew," Kate whispered. "Victoria discovered everything and was collecting proof." Suddenly, a car pulled up outside. A black SUV. 2 men in suits stepped out. "Through the garage," Jonathan whispered, quickly grabbing the most important documents. "There's a walkway to the beach." As they moved quietly, they heard the doorbell. Then, the sound of someone forcing the lock. The chase had begun. Jonathan and Kate ran through the sandy beach path, the waves crashing nearby. The noise of the ocean covered their footsteps, but it also made it harder to hear if anyone was behind them. "This way," Jonathan whispered, leading Kate behind some large rocks where they could watch the house without being seen. The 2 men in suits were now inside, searching each room. Kate clutched the folder of documents to her chest. She wasn't scared. She was angry. "We need help," Jonathan muttered, taking out his phone. He hesitated, then dialed a number he had promised never to use. After 3 rings, a woman answered. "Charlotte Reed." "Kate, it's Jonathan Pierce. I need that favor you owe me." There was a long pause. Charlotte Reed was a federal prosecutor. Years ago, Jonathan helped her hide a family scandal that could have ruined her career. "Where are you?" she asked, sounding concerned. "I can't say over the phone, but I need you to check the federal files on the 1995 New Horizons adoption investigation." "Jonathan, those files are sealed by court order." "Exactly, and I bet you know why." Another pause. Then she said, "Meet me at Pier 23 in Santa Monica in an hour. Come alone." "I can't. Kate is with me." "Kate?" Charlotte's voice shook. "Victoria's sister?" "Yes, and Kate, Dr. Henry Lawson was murdered today." A gasp. "My God, it's all connected, isn't it?" "More than we thought. 1 hour. Pier 23. Jonathan hung up and saw the men leaving the house, frustrated. The black SUV drove toward the highway. "Can we trust her?" Kate asked, her green eyes locked on Jonathan's. Charlotte was more than Victoria's friend. She was her secret keeper, Jonathan said. And she has access to information that can expose the Whitman Foundation. As they walked toward Santa Monica, Kate told Jonathan about Victoria's letters. She wrote about secret foundation meetings in Calabasas. That's where the deals were made. Jonathan nodded. Grant is searching for records of the children who went through there. They arrived at Pier 23 early. The small seaside cafe was nearly empty. Charlotte Reed was waiting in the back. She gasped when she saw Kate. "It's like seeing a ghost." "We don't have time," Jonathan said, sitting down. "What do you know about the 95 investigation?" Charlotte opened her briefcase. It was dropped because of lack of evidence, but there was pressure from powerful people. 3 federal agents were suddenly transferred. A judge retired. Key witnesses disappeared. "Like Dr. Henry Lawson," Kate said bitterly. "Exactly, but they made a mistake." Charlotte pulled out a USB stick. "I always keep backup copies of suspicious cases." A loud crash came from the kitchen. Jonathan noticed a man in a dark jacket watching them. "Back exit now," he muttered. As they stood, gunfire erupted. Jonathan pushed Kate and Charlotte toward the kitchen. They ran through the back alley to Charlotte's black BMW. As they sped away, Charlotte said, "This USB contains original witness statements, including one from the Whitman Foundation's accountant. It proves how they laundered money." Jonathan plugged it into his laptop, but before he could open it, a black SUV crashed into them, spinning their car out of control. The car crashed against a fire hydrant, sending water spraying everywhere. "Get out!" Charlotte shouted, blood dripping from her forehead. Jonathan grabbed Kate, pulling her away. The black SUV was coming back. "We need to give this evidence to the media," Kate said. "Not just any media," Jonathan replied, starting the car. "We need someone who can't be bought." "I know someone," she said. "She is a reporter for the Washington Post. She tried to tell the world about the Whitman Foundation before, but she didn't have enough proof." Suddenly, gunshots echoed in the parking lot. Jonathan stepped on the gas, speeding toward the exit. The tires screeched as he took a sharp turn. "Her name is Madeline Clark," Olivia continued, holding on tightly as the car swerved again. "She is in Los Angeles. She's been looking into charities that are secretly hiding stolen money." "How soon can we meet her?" Jonathan asked, looking in the rearview mirror at the SUV chasing them. "She can meet us in an hour," Olivia replied. "There's a safe place in Venice Beach." Kate held a folder close to her chest. Her face was pale, and she looked nervous. "Victoria died trying to expose this truth. We can't fail her now." Jonathan reached over and held her hand. She looked just like Victoria at that moment, strong and determined, with the same bright green eyes. "We won't fail," he promised. He weaved through the heavy Santa Monica traffic. "We'll stop them. For Victoria, for you, for all the families they've hurt." As they drove, the sun set over the Pacific Ocean, painting the sky in orange. But their world felt dark and dangerous. Somewhere in the city, William Whitman and his men probably already knew their secrets were about to be exposed. The sky was black when Jonathan, Kate, and Olivia reached the meeting place. An old warehouse turned into an art studio in Venice Beach. Madeline Clark was waiting for them at the back entrance. She looked at them carefully, quickly understanding the danger they were in. "You guys look like you've had a rough time," she said, leading them inside. The warehouse was big, with walls dividing it into small sections. There were cameras, lights, and photography equipment placed all around, providing hiding spots and good views of the area. "We need protection," Jonathan said, gripping the folder tightly. "Don't worry," Madeline interrupted, pointing to a laptop connected to several screens. "We're live streaming this meeting to safe locations in 3 different countries. If anything happens to us, my team will publish everything in 15 news outlets at once." Kate set the documents on a table, her hands shaking a little as she arranged them. "Here are the bank records, photos of secret meetings, and witness statements." Madeline studied the papers, her experienced eyes focused. "This is bigger than I thought. The Whitman Foundation wasn't just taking children. It was at the center of a worldwide crime network. Victoria found out when she saw strange numbers in their financial records," Olivia added, showing Madeline some of Victoria's notes. Jonathan looked out the window, remembering his last days with Victoria. She had been acting strange before her accident, worried and distant. Now he knew why. A noise from the roof made everyone freeze. Madeline quickly turned off the main lights, leaving only the glow of the screens. "I have guards outside," she whispered, moving toward a control panel. "If someone tries to." The sound of breaking glass upstairs cut her off. Jonathan grabbed Kate and pulled her behind a partition. Olivia and Madeline moved to different corners, ready to fight. "Keep the stream going," Madeline whispered into a small microphone. "No matter what happens, this must get out." Heavy footsteps echoed above. Kate held the USB stick with all the proof. Her face was scared, but she stood tall. "Jonathan," she whispered, "if something happens—" "Nothing will happen," he interrupted, squeezing her hand. "We're finishing this, for Victoria." Madeline pointed toward a hidden emergency staircase behind some equipment. "That door leads to a tunnel. I can buy you some time." Before they could move, an explosion shook the building. Smoke filled the air, making it hard to breathe. "File sent," Madeline said, typing quickly on her keyboard. "In 10 minutes, the whole world will know." The front door burst open. Armed men ran inside. Jonathan recognized 2 of them. They had broken into his house in Malibu before. Then a voice came from the smoke. "Mr. Pierce." William Whitman stepped forward, his expensive suit still neat despite the chaos. "You shouldn't have gotten involved," he said coldly. Kate stood up, her hands clenched into fists. "How could you? You raised Victoria like a daughter. How could you break families and ruin lives?" "You don't understand," William replied, his voice calm. "Some families deserve children more than others. We were just redistributing resources." Jonathan stepped closer, anger in his eyes. "They were children, and you killed your own daughter to keep your secrets." William smirked. "Victoria should have stayed out of it. She had everything. Money, a good life, but she wanted to play the hero." Sirens wailed outside. Madeline smiled. "Too late, Whitman. The world knows now." William pulled out a gun, but before he could shoot, Olivia jumped from the shadows and knocked him out with a single hard punch. His men tried to react, but just then, FBI agents crashed through the windows. "FBI! Everyone down!" they shouted. Smoke and shouting filled the room as the agents arrested Whitman's men. Kate held on to Jonathan, tears running down her face as they watched William Whitman get handcuffed. "It's over," Madeline said, walking up to them. "The story is out. The whole world knows the truth." Jonathan pulled Kate into a hug. He felt the fear in her body slowly fade away. Through the broken windows, the lights of Los Angeles shined brightly. They were like silent witnesses to the truth that could no longer be hidden. Victoria had fought for justice, and now, at last, it would be served. The next morning, the entire city was talking about the Whitman Foundation's crimes. The newspapers had big headlines exposing the truth. The world finally knew what had been hidden for so long. Thanks for watching. If you liked the story, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Check out our other videos too. See you in the next one.